Okay, so the book rested overnight. We took the brace off, and this is the result. I have to say, I'm actually reasonably happy with this. That leather is looking pretty gorgeous. We obviously had the tidy up inside with new end pages to do, but as it stands, that's looking pretty good. And later on in the process, I'm going to give thoughts as to whether this label can be saved and recycled. Honestly, I think the chances are low, and I think what we'll probably end up doing is using this really beautiful piece of red leather here to fashion a new leather with the a new label with the stamping set. But before we get there, we're going to put some beautiful leather corners on these books. So first off, before we actually get to the process of how we do that, it's worth thinking about just how big you want these corners to be. And this is a nice example from a set of books that I have. There looks to be a basic rule that this distance here along the diagonal, you want to be roughly equal to the amount of leather showing here. Now don't forget, this already has paper over it, so the leather will be coming in a little bit further here and a little bit further there. But big picture, we don't want to make these too big because, you know, that consumes leather, which is expensive, and you may not have the cuts to make the shape. But the basic rule would be, given that, you know, this is going to be at least slightly covered with paper, we don't want this to be bigger here than it is here. And I think we could safely cut a section of leather, again, given that it's going to be covered with paper to a little extent, that comes in no more than 1.5 inches to about here. And that just feels like pleasing to the eye to have something that, you know, is about there and about there. So I think that feels about right. So what's the magic formula for how to cut a piece of leather to make a corner here? And there's been a little bit of trigonometry thought through during a period of insomnia, and also just some experimentation. But this basically appears to be the formula. So if we take this distance here, I'm just going to call this the what should we call it? The size. So the size of the corners, we're going to use a piece of leather that equals the length, width. We're going to cut a rectangle, and the width is going to be the size that we want, plus the thickness of the board. The length is equal to 2 times the width. Okay, so if we want a corner that's 1.5 inches, we need a rectangle that's going to be, now if we just measure the thickness of the board here, I'm not sure if this will focus extremely well, so you may just have to trust me on this, but that basically is 3/16 of an inch. So we're going to want that's 1.5 plus 3/16, which equals 1 11/16 inch. This is going to be exactly double that. So that's going to be 3 inches plus 6/16. So that's going to, yeah, so 3 inches. There you go. All right. So that's the size we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is fashion this with paper. Strongly recommend making life easy on yourself by using the existing right angle corner of a piece of paper. So let's do our measuring. Want to be, okay, that's 1/2 inch. 1, 2, 3, that's 1 11/16 of an inch. I'm going to measure that there. I'm going to do the same thing up above here. It's worth doing this a few times if you want to get a, 2 lines do not make a plot. 3 lines do. 3 or 4 dots do rather. I'm going to do the same here for the length. So this is going to be 3 6/16 inch. Or 3 3/8. Strongly recommend always doing a template in paper first before taking your scissors anywhere near a piece of leather. And then we can use the paper as a template. Okay. Let's see if it worked. So the way in which you want to apply this is, see the corner? You want the corner to point down the center of the board, like a little arrow. Now this will be out of camera shot, but I'm going to do exactly the same thing along the top edge. And if you do that, oops, I'm going to gently turn the book over. You'll see it magically comes together there. The edges meet. Now, what I'm going to do is focus the camera in on the edge. So the reason you add that extra bit for the thickness of the board is, even if you had a perfect coverage here, what you don't want is for it to open up like this so that you actually have a bit of board peeking on the inside of the book. So we want to cover that. Now, the compromise is you're going to end up with a tiny little lip like this when it's glued in place, which you can either fold over or just snip off. It doesn't matter what you do. But that's kind of where we want to get to. Now, that all looks very easy, but the problem we're going to have is these boards, as you can see, the corners have been bumped and beaten up, and that's where, you know, the mathematics of this whole process is going to get mugged by reality. So there's going to have to be a little bit of give and take here, and the leather will be wet when we put it on, so it will have a little bit of stretch. But either way, that's how we do it. So I'll just zoom back out. That's one I did earlier, right there. Just put this book on here for weight and for comparison. That's what we're aiming for. Now, the actual, because we're going to put paper on, the actual amount of leather that's going to be visible is going to be a little bit less at each corner and also a little bit less along this edge, but that kind of gives you the idea. So, once again, take a screenshot. That's the formula. That's how it's done. The most important thing to bear in mind is that the ratio is simply 2 to 1. Your rectangle needs to be twice as high as it is long. All right, next we're going to move on to using the leather. Got some fragments here. These are going to go into their bath. Nice, so we'll soften them up and then we'll use this as a template for cutting the leather. Okay, here we go. These are our corners. Now, the thing we need to bear in mind here is that we are dealing with leather. Leather changes and distorts. Actually, just needs to nip there. That changes and distorts as you cycle it between wet and dry. So we want to move reasonably quickly while this leather's damp to secure these into place. So I'm going to do the rear cover first. Word to the wise, don't forget, leather has a fine side and a rougher side. You want the rougher side facing inwards, so just make sure that you stick the right face of the leather down onto the cover as opposed to showing outwards. So I'm going to use basically the same gluing protocol as I do with labels, which is just keeping in a margin like this, because it's all going to sort of splurge outwards anyway. Now I'm going to locate this. Now, first thing, just flatten down the corner as much as you can, because obviously that'll cause a distortion. I've just propped the book open here just with a piece of, just an object. I just want to avoid, this is going to be messy, but I want to avoid getting, like I did just there, glue where it shouldn't go. So again, same protocol. I want the corner of the leather in the middle part of the board pointing down, both on the foredge and the top edge, like that. This is a bit, honestly, a bit finicky to do, and you need to really flatten it to make it yield. Got a great big glob of glue there that isn't going to be necessary, so I'm going to squeeze that out like so. So you can see the corners fighting me as well. There's nothing fancy about this process, it's just gucky. All right, so what I'm now going to do, I'm going to first off put a piece of absorbent cloth across. Eventually, I'm going to put some shims across there because we're going to have to exert quite a bit of pressure. Okay, I'll now quickly move on to the bottom one. Same process. This corner's not quite so bumped, so hopefully it will be easier. It will behave itself a little better as we locate it. Corner halfway down. Just do that now. I'm going to carefully, just use a single pair of shims for this. Let's flip the book over and see if we've done something that looks okay or not. We have a little bit of forgiveness baked into the fact that this edge is going to be covered with paper, but I'm thinking that we're basically on the right track here. Just bring this back into shot. So, yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, got this little overhang here. That's all right. We can snip that when we're all said and done. But do we have something that looks symmetrical? Yes, we do. It's meeting at the back symmetrically as well, which is great. Okay. So, again, what I'm now going to do is that's a signal that we may need a spot more glue. And it is important to work quite fast because the leather starts to dry and stiffen, and it'll start to not want to cooperate with what you're doing. Now, what I'm going to do just now is there. I'm going to put pressure there, and that will enable those corners to start to set. I'm going to quickly soak these in water and I'll be right back. Okay, let's continue. It's looking good. I really want to protect that title page. Don't want gum getting on there. I also need to have this stay in place. So I'm just going to put it like that for a second. And 4. You can see this corner's really beaten up. This may take a little bit of adjustment and tugging and pulling and praying and to get it really in the right place, but we'll see. Okay. That's proven a little bit more forgiving than I'd feared. Right, now I've got that done. I'm going to take this weight out. I've got the shim keeping the text block away from the glue, which is really important. Okay, I'm going to secure these in a second, but worth just having a peek underneath. In an ideal world, you want the edges to come together as perfect triangles. That's a good sign that you've located these appropriately. All right, so these are fighting me now in terms of staying down. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did below. Have a couple of shims here. I want to make sure that we protect the text block from any glue, especially the title page. So what I'm then going to do, put another piece of kitchen roll there. And down she goes. Now, I've got a couple of shims under here that I don't need. Let's come out. Now, these corners do have a lot of glue on, but there's clearly some resistance going on there. So what we're going to need to do, what I don't want to start doing is clipping the leather in place or anything like that. I'd rather just locate them and then use gravity to make sure they don't shift. And then let the glue do its work as the leather dries. Okay. That's why it's actually sticking to the cloth. Couple more shims. And then pick this up. Shims this side, although this is already starting to see. This one's moved. Yeah, this one's moved slightly. There we go. Use the weight just for now. Hopefully it stays stable. Oops. Maybe that's how we leave it. That actually allows me to really make sure that these are in place. Okay. I'm now going to leave this for an hour or so. And we'll have a look at the result. As I say, there's a little bit of forgiveness we'll get for the fact that we're going to cover these edges with paper, but I'm feeling like we're going to achieve what we set out to. Okay, so just going to do a little walk around here just while the corners are drying. As you can see, little gaps, little imperfections. You know, leather's a living product and the boards are not completely square in any way and the corners were bumped, but nevertheless, there we go. How does it look outside? There we go. That's what we want. So this is looking pretty good. So raises an interesting question, which is, now I've actually repaired the spine and the corners, the actual effect here is not unpleasant. Admittedly, you know, the board's bashed along the edge, there are some marks here. So I think I still want to, I mean, there is an argument for just declaring victory at this point and saying that's it, the book's restored, but I think there's still an argument for having a nice paper here of some form. And I'm actually starting to warm to the idea that maybe a sort of reasonably conservative marbled paper might actually be the way to go as opposed to something just in one sort of dominant colour, but I don't know. So the next step's going to be, we're going to take this book and